On the afternoon of January 29, 1945, in the remote Belgian village of Holsheim, snow blanketed every path. Master Sergeant Leonard Funk, a man of slight stature, rounded the corner of a farmhouse and came to a dead stop. Before him was an unbelievable sight. 90 German soldiers were milling about the yard. Some were armed, while others were hurriedly scrambling to pick up rifles from the ground. In the center of the yard, 4 of his American soldiers were kneeling with their hands behind their heads, resigned to their fate as prisoners. Just 20 minutes earlier, this group of Germans had been POWs. But while Funk was busy clearing other pockets of resistance in the village, a German patrol had launched a surprise raid, liberating their comrades and disarming the 4 American guards. Now, they were a fully armed force ready to strike Funk's company from behind. An arrogant German officer stepped forward, jammed the muzzle of an MP-40 submachine gun into Funk's stomach, and barked orders in German. In the biting cold, with the steel barrel pressed against his flesh, Funk stood silent. He didn't understand German, but he understood the situation perfectly, 90 against 1. Death seemed certain. Yet, instead of raising his hands in surrender or trembling for mercy, Leonard Funk began to laugh. His laughter echoed through the farmyard, starting as a chuckle, then erupting into a roar of mad, joyous laughter. The German officer froze, his face shifting from aggression to bewilderment, and then to pure rage. The louder the officer screamed, the harder Funk laughed. But this was not the laughter of surrender. In the next 60 seconds, the air exploded with gunfire. When the smoke cleared, 21 German soldiers lay dead, and the rest, paralyzed by fear, threw down their weapons to surrender for a second time. Leonard Funk had written one of the most incredible chapters of World War II, fueled by that very moment of fateful laughter. Leonard Funk was not a superhero, stepped out of the pages of fantasy comic books. He was a product of a harsh era, where will was forged in the mud and industrial smog. Born in 1916 in Braddock Township, Pennsylvania, the heart of the American steel industry at the time, Funk grew up amidst the soot-blackened smoke of the foundries lining the Monongahela River. His childhood had no room for daydreams. When the Great Depression swept across America in 1929, Funk's family was no exception. His first lessons in survival and responsibility came not from books, but from caring for his younger brother while his parents struggled to earn every penny. It was those difficult days that created a Leonard Funk who was strangely calm, a man who understood that in a storm, the survivor isn't the one who screams the loudest, but the one who knows how to keep their footing. In 1941, as the specter of war loomed globally and the U.S. Congress expanded the draft, the 24-year-old Funk eagerly enlisted. The day he reported to the induction center in Wilkinsburg, medical examiners looked at him with clear skepticism. Standing a mere 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighing 140 pounds, Funk looked more like a court clerk or a postal worker than a warrior. They thought he would settle for an administrative job in the rear, where numbers and paperwork were much safer than stray bullets. However, Funk stunned everyone by volunteering for the paratroopers. At that time, the American Airborne Branch was still a risky experiment and was considered a suicide mission. The idea of stepping out of a plane door at hundreds of feet with a piece of silk on your back to land behind enemy lines seemed meant only for madmen or those with extraordinary courage. Funk belonged to the latter. He wasn't seeking glory, he was seeking a place where his will would be tested to its absolute limit. Training at Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, was a brutal filtration process. For 5 grueling weeks, Funk and his comrades endured physical drills that pushed beyond human endurance, from forced marches to jumping from towering towers. With each passing day, half of the candidates dropped out due to exhaustion or injury. Funk was different, he trudged forward with the sheer grit of a Pennsylvania steelworker. By the time he officially earned his wings and joined the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the famed 82nd Airborne Division, Funk was 27 years old. In the world of paratroopers, where most soldiers were 19 or 20-year-olds with hot blood rushing through their veins, Funk was called the old man. But that age gap was actually an advantage. While the younger soldiers easily fell into states of panic or impulsiveness, Funk provided a necessary stability. He didn't lead through shouting, but through professional competence and incredible composure. There was a kind of quiet authority about Funk. The men under his command quickly realized that while their leader was small in stature, inside his chest was a heart of steel and a mind that remained sharp even when death was closing in. It was this maturity that helped him rise quickly from a squad leader to one of the souls of Company C, preparing for the fiery days on the European battlefield. Leonard Funk's journey across the European theater was not merely a series of engagements, but a chain of miracles written by an unbelievable tenacity. It all began in the early hours of June 6, 1944, the historic D-Day. Amidst a Normandy sky ablaze with anti-aircraft fire, Funk hurled himself out of the door of a C-47. The wind howled, and tracer rounds tore through the night like deadly flashes of lightning. Upon landing, a violent impact severely sprained Funk's ankle, causing pain so sharp it felt as if it were being torn apart. In the chaos of paratroopers being dropped scattered far and wide, Funk found himself alone in Nazi-controlled territory, 40 miles away from his intended assembly point. For an ordinary person, such an injury would be a valid reason to lie down and wait for help. But for Funk, it was just another obstacle to overcome. He didn't just drag himself along in agony, he gathered lost soldiers from various units. With a natural instinct for command, Funk led this group of 18 men on an unprecedented journey. For 10 days and nights, they moved like ghosts through villages and forests, crawling with German soldiers, hiding by day and marching by night. Despite being the most seriously injured, Funk insisted on acting as the lead scout, putting himself in the most dangerous position to protect his comrades. The result was a miracle. He brought all 18 men back to Allied lines without a single loss. His first Silver Star was the recognition of that unparalleled courage. 3 months later, in September 1944, Funk was back in action for Operation Market Garden in the Netherlands, the largest airborne operation in history. Here, his sheer grit saved hundreds of lives. While on a mission near Nijmegen, Funk spotted 3 German 20mm anti-aircraft guns frantically firing at descending Allied gliders. The fragile gliders, filled with supplies and personnel, were completely helpless against this fire. Without a moment's hesitation, Funk and just 3 other soldiers launched a daring, few against many, assault. According to all military theory, attacking a prepared position defended by 20 gunmen was unthinkable for a 4-man team. But Funk used speed and the element of surprise to compensate for his numbers. They stormed in like a whirlwind, sweeping through the resistance nests and neutralizing all 3 guns in the blink of an eye. 20 German soldiers were killed or captured, while Funk's team remained completely safe. This illustrious feat earned him the Distinguished Service Cross, DSC, the second highest military decoration in the United States. However, the real turning point that changed Funk's combat mindset did not come from medals, but from a bloody memory known as Malmedy. During the German winter offensive of 1944, the Battle of the Bulge, news of the SS brutally executing 84 unarmed American prisoners in a snowy field shocked the entire Allied military. For Funk, this was no longer a conventional war between soldiers, it was a confrontation with pure evil. Witnessing his comrades being gunned down like animals after they had surrendered, a cold fury seeped into the small master sergeant's blood. Funk made a grim vow to himself: he would never, under any desperate circumstance, lay down his arms to surrender to the Germans. That vow was the key to his strange reaction later at Holzheim, where instead of trembling before a gun barrel pressed against his stomach, he chose to smile at death. Returning to the afternoon of January 29, 1945, the cold of the Ardennes felt as though it wanted to freeze every sense. When Leonard Funk stepped around the corner of the farmhouse and faced 90 muzzles, time seemed to stand still. In that life-or-death moment, as the German officer jammed the cold steel of an MP-40 into his stomach, there was no room in Funk's mind for panic. On the contrary, a searing memory of the Malmedy massacre flooded his thoughts. He remembered the bodies of his comrades huddled in the snow. He remembered how the SS had stripped away the honor of soldiers who surrendered. In Funk's head now, there was only one command: never surrender. Funk's laughter rang out, initially just a breath forced from his chest, then quickly erupting into bursts of laughter so joyous they bordered on madness. It was an incredibly sophisticated psychological move, an act so illogical that it completely shattered the confidence of the man standing before him. The German officer, who held the power of life and death just moments before, suddenly fell into a state of utter confusion. He had never seen a prisoner laugh with a gun barrel pressed against their flesh. His aggression and tyranny were replaced by a ridiculous bewilderment. He screamed, his face flushing red with rage, but Funk's laughter did not stop, as if mocking the futility of the death closing in. That laughter did not just distract the enemy, it was a signal to the 4 American soldiers kneeling on the ground that this battle was not over. Taking full advantage of the brief seconds the German officer remained frozen by the absurdity of the situation, Funk began his final act. He slowly moved his hand toward his shoulder, appearing as if he were taking off his Thompson submachine gun to hand it over as ordered. The German officer relaxed his finger on the trigger slightly, believing he had finally subdued this crazy master sergeant. But that was his final mistake. With a speed far exceeding the eye's ability to react, Funk executed a powerful pivot. The Thompson swung down, its muzzle leveling perfectly with the enemy's chest. He squeezed the trigger. The sharp cracks of .45 ACP rounds tore through the silence. In less than 3 seconds, 30 bullets slammed into the officer's body, hurling him backward before he could even comprehend what was happening. Without stopping for a second to observe the result, Funk performed a skill honed through tens of thousands of repetitions on the drill field, reloading. His movements were as smooth as a machine. The empty magazine had barely hit the snow before a fresh one was locked into the well. He spun like a dancer of death, sweeping through the nearest German groups who were attempting to raise their rifles. At the same time, his thunderous shout ripped through the air, "Get up! Pick up their weapons!" The 4 kneeling Americans, as if jolted by an electric current, lunged for the guns scattered in the snow and began a frantic counterattack. The tide of the gunfight turned with unbelievable speed. Chaos switched sides. The 90 German soldiers, despite their numbers, had lost their leader and were stunned by the impossibly fierce resistance from a single small man. When the final shot went silent, the white snow of Holzheim was stained red. 21 German soldiers were dead, dozens were wounded, and the rest tremblingly raised their hands to surrender. This time, it was a real surrender, with no resistance. Amidst the battlefield littered with bodies and lingering gun smoke, Leonard Funk stood there, the Thompson in his hand still smoking. He looked around, his face returning to its usual cold composure. There were no grand declarations, no victor's exhilaration. He simply looked at his men and uttered a short, sarcastic, yet profoundly realistic sentence: "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life." That statement was not just for the carelessness of the American soldiers, but for the delusion of the Germans who thought they could subdue a heart of steel with nothing more than a gun to the gut. The war ended to the cheers of millions, but for Leonard Funk, it was simply the time to fulfill his vow to his country and return home. On September 5, 1945, under the bright sunlight of the White House Rose Garden, a historic moment took place. President Harry Truman, the man who had just held the power to end the World War with the most terrifying weapons, stood before this small master sergeant. As he draped the Medal of Honor around Funk's neck, Truman uttered a sentence that would later become a classic: "I would rather have this medal than be President of the United States." This was not mere political pleasantry. Truman understood that the medal represented a kind of power no election could ever bestow: a courage that transcended the instinct for survival. With a long list of prestigious awards, from the Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart to honors from France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, Leonard Funk officially became the most decorated paratrooper in the history of the U.S. Army. He was a living legend, a symbol of the famed 82nd Airborne Division. However, instead of using that spotlight to enter politics or seek fortune from glittering memoirs, Leonard Funk chose a path that astonished many, a quiet disappearance into ordinary life. He tucked his medals into a wooden box, hung his paratrooper uniform in the closet, and returned to Pennsylvania. He didn't need the cheers of the crowd, he needed the peace of home. For the next 27 years, people saw a calm, slight man showing up on time every day at the office of the Department of Veterans Affairs, VA. Instead of a gun, he held a pen. Instead of giving orders on the battlefield, he meticulously reviewed medical records and benefit claims for his former comrades. Funk understood better than anyone the cost of war, the wounds not just on the flesh, but in the souls of soldiers. He sat devotedly behind a desk, patiently facing dry administrative barriers just to ensure that every returning soldier received the care they deserved. A hero who once mocked death now spent his life quietly soothing the pain of others. Leonard Funk passed away in 1992 from cancer at the age of 76. Until his final moments, his neighbors in McKeesport and colleagues at the VA knew him only as an exemplary public servant and a devoted father. He rarely, if ever, spoke of the drama at Holzheim or the moment he laughed in the faces of 90 German soldiers. When asked about his feats, he would only gently shrug, "I only did what a soldier had to do." His body was laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery, among the thousands of white graves of other heroes. Leonard Funk passed away, leaving behind a profound and timeless lesson for posterity. He proved that true courage does not necessarily come with a giant physique or grand proclamations. The greatest courage lies in absolute clarity when facing adversity, in keeping a cool head when the enemy's gun is pressed against your heart, and in the ability to remain humble when the world is at your feet. The name Leonard Funk may not appear as frequently in Hollywood films as other heroes, but in the hearts of paratroopers and those who know the story of the laughter of death, he remains an immortal monument to will and character. The story of Leonard Funk at Holzheim is not merely an anecdote about luck, it stands as a historical testament to the power of the human spirit during the darkest moments of World War II. In terms of historical significance, Funk's actions symbolize the resilience of the Allied forces during the final stages of the war. The Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last desperate attempt to turn the tide. In a context where American troops were exhausted by the freezing cold and German aggression, Funk's feat became an invaluable morale booster. It proved that even when completely outnumbered, 90-1, an individual with an iron will could shift the outcome of an entire battle. Its significance also lies in the pursuit of justice. Funk acted based on the memory of the Malmedy massacre, transforming indignation toward evil into the strength to protect his comrades, asserting that a soldier's dignity cannot be conquered by violence. Regarding life lessons, Leonard Funk leaves behind 3 core values. Courage is clarity. The greatest lesson is not about picking up a gun, but the ability to control one's psyche. Funk's laughter was an asymmetric weapon. It reminds us that in adversity, the winner is the one who remains calm enough to think while the opponent is confused. Leadership through action. Funk did not stand back and give orders, he was the first to fire, the first to accept the highest risk. The trust his subordinates placed in him was built on personal devotion and sacrifice. Humility after glory. Funk's post-war life is a lesson in character. He did not live off the glory of the past but chose to contribute quietly to his community. This defines a true hero, someone who does great things out of duty, not for applause. Leonard Funk taught posterity that the size of a person is not found in their physical stature, but in the magnitude of their will when facing the gun barrel of fate.